All right, welcome back. We are MDEV1004. That's Mobile APIs and Frameworks in the summer 2024 semester at Georgian. And it's week 2, part 2 of our broadcast and recording. And in this part, we're actually going to do some work. We're going to talk about some JavaScript. We're going to talk about some TypeScript. There's going to be some talking about that involved, like me lecturing a little bit. I don't like to do it too much. I like to go right to the code as much as I can. But we do need to discuss some stuff. And I'm hoping that this is going to be useful to you. If you have questions, and again, if you're online, I know some of you are. I've got 6 people online right now, and a couple of people in class. If you've got some questions, please feel free to interrupt me. Put up your hand. You can do that in online. You guys can interrupt me as well if you have a question about anything or comments. And I'm going to go through pretty quick because we've got a lot of slides. I've got 85 slides. One thing I'm going to tell you is I don't read every slide. I'm just going to go one slide after the other and go through them because I think there's going to be some things I'll talk to, but the slides are there for you. So that way, if you need a reference, want to look at the stuff that I've talked about, you can certainly do that by looking at the slides. So without further ado, let's get to it. All right, so we postmarked assignment 1. We talked about that just now in the previous video. It's worth 7.5% due week 4. That's what's happening right now. First exercise, in-class exercise. Most of you did it pretty good, like I said, and you get the best 10 out of 12. For people who are new to the course this week, some people are going to join this week. Some people have asked, well, I wasn't here last week. Can I still do in-class exercise 1? No, it's done, right? You still have, 11 out of 12 exercises to do, and you can still get 100%. So if you didn't do in-class exercise 1 somehow for whatever reason, or you got 0, you still have a chance to get 100% if you do everything right going forward. Okay? Let's move on. So last week we talked about course orientation, what's an API, we set up your environment, we talked about version control, and we did in-class exercise 1. This week we're going to be talking about a little bit of I'm going to talk about assignment videos a little bit just right now. And what I want to talk about with assignment videos is the following. Please take them seriously. I know some of you have submitted your assignment videos and I can't hear you very well, right? And you've maybe lost some marks. But I need to be able to hear you and see your, I need to see your screen very well. Are you guys good? You guys have questions? Okay, yes. June 2nd.
Yeah. So I will also question about assignment. So after computer class, I have
Sure, you can wait to the class or you can ask now. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Did you have a question now? Do you want to ask for assignment 1? Or you can ask later. Okay, no problem. So assignment video is very important. So please, before you submit stuff, what I'd ask you to do to prevent any mark loss or potential mark loss is please take a look at your video. Watch your own video. See, can you hear yourself? If your video, if you can't hear you, I can't hear you, right? So make sure you check your submission, please. Okay, so that's why I want to talk about assignment videos. This is a common thing every week, every semester. Remember, because you can do this course asynchronously, I need the video. No video, no GitHub, no marks. And that's just the way it is, okay? So please make sure you have that done. Let's move on to JavaScript. I know some of you are experts in JavaScript right now, right? You guys are awesome in JavaScript. And some of you are new to JavaScript, like you haven't done it very well or very much in your life. So we're going to do a bit of a JavaScript review today and talk about JavaScript. Why? Because TypeScript, which is a superset of JavaScript, is based on JavaScript. You don't know JavaScript, you don't know TypeScript. You can't use it, right? And because we're building a web API, that's what we're building as part of the semester, you need to know these tools, okay? So for those people who are good, who are awesome at this stuff, who know everything, who've done web development, please bear with me, okay? I know I'm going to go slow for you. You're going to look at me and you're going to be like, why is he talking about this? This is so easy, right? And for other people, this is going to be like, holy crap, there's a lot that he just gave me. Right? There's so much. My brain is over full, right? Because you've never done it before. Think about what I'm going to talk about right now over the next few slides as all the advanced JavaScript you need to make this stuff work. okay? Here's what I can't do. I cannot teach you JavaScript in one class. It's impossible. So if you're someone who's never done JavaScript before, you need to do some of your own tutorials in order for you to get up to speed, because my expectation is you know some JavaScript. You've done it somewhere else, okay? Let's move on. Back in 2015, let's talk about this. For years, JavaScript was in the dark, right? We were running with ECMAScript 3, which was a previous version of JavaScript, until 2015. 2015 was a revolutionary year for JavaScript, and the reason why is because we moved away from ECMAScript 5, and they created a new standard called ECMAScript 6, or JavaScript Next is what it was called at the time. So this is the 6th official edition of ECMAScript. ECMAScript is the language that JavaScript is based upon, right? And you can look that up if you like. But the reason why it was so amazing is because JavaScript in general was the language of the web. It created our behaviors, for a lot of the stuff we did. And for a long time, we used shims and different other kinds of frameworks, like jQuery as an example, to make JavaScript easier, right? That's what we ended up doing. And that could only take us so far. But what ended up happening was that 2015 was a key year because this is the year that JavaScript went everywhere. JavaScript was on the front end, JavaScript was fully on the back end, and so on. So one thing that we have to talk about with JavaScript is the module pattern, right? JavaScript for a long time didn't have a great module pattern. What you had to do was you had to include the other JavaScript file, as an example, inside of your HTML document. And for a long time, because we did front-end technology only with JavaScript, you had to use the index.html or some HTML file to bind all your JavaScript together. That's what we used to do. And so in 2015, they created the module pattern that they wanted to use. There was something called CommonJS, right? And they created the ECMAScript module pattern, and it allowed us to do things like imports and exports. Okay, very, very simple. We've had that in other languages for a long time. 2015 is when it happened for JavaScript. Okay, the way it works is if you're going to do it with just HTML, you need to add the type equal module attribute for each module you want to use. Okay, so and what you can do then is do the import and export. Support for this feature was not 100%, right? It was like 80%. Some browsers didn't even support it. Back in the day, we still had Internet Explorer, which was a terrible browser, right? And now Microsoft Edge, it's okay. I'm not still my favorite. It's not my favorite, right? I still use Chrome for most things, and Firefox. Those are the two things. I'm not really a fan of Safari. I don't like Safari. I know that's most of you use Safari if you're on a Mac, as an example. But I still think Safari has a long way to go. They still need to fix it, right? So, and we'll talk about this because Safari is very different when it comes to stuff that you want to try and do. And a good example of that is if you ever try and do changes to a pull down or something, Safari just ignores your CSS altogether. It's really weird. Let's take a look at an example of a module. Okay, this is what you need to know. So here's an export statement. I would export a single function. This might be called half of x. That's the function. And here I return x divided by 2. That is what the function looks like. And so in my main.js, if this is lib.js has this function, maybe with a lot of other little functions, right? Maybe this is a library file. Here in main.js, I need to import half of from lib. This pattern that you see here, this pattern, import half of from lib, we're going to see it when we use express and everything else, okay? So this is something that we're going to do. Import something. This thing that we're doing half of is a representation. I'm just going to use my annotation tool here for a second. It's a representation. This half of is a reference to this. That's what this is, okay? It's a reference. Half of is a reference to this function, right? So it represents your function altogether. That means when I use half of, it's like I'm using this function inside this other file. That's how it's like, okay? This is very different than in other languages. We can take it further, right? Where I have two functions, half of and multiply. Now you can see I have two functions here, and I can import both of them, half of and multiply. You can see that I put these in curly braces from lib. And this idea of import is the ability for me to import more than one function from a particular file. So one thing that we also support in ECMAScript 2015 was the idea of a default export. Default export has a function or a value, a variable, that you can have as the default export value. And now I can actually do something like this. This function is an anonymous function. Okay, guys, for the room and people online, what is an anonymous function? Very simple question. You guys should be able to answer that question? 2 seconds. An anonymous function. There's no identity? Okay, no problem. You're right, there's no name. It is a function with no name. Right, that's what a function is, anonymous function. So one thing that we can do with JavaScript is the function itself returns a reference to a memory reference. That's what it does, right? It's a memory value. If you've done C++ before or Java or C#, think about this as a reference type, okay? And so here when we import, we didn't import the name of the function anymore. Because this doesn't have a name, right? We need to give it a name. So do something, in this case, again, I'm just using my annotation tool here, do something represents this function. Okay, that's what it does. Do something represents this function here, which is an anonymous function, right? And so do something now is the name of this function in the main.js file. Even though maybe in another file, let's say do something.js, we import this one from do something. That's what we're doing here. But do something, the function, we named this. You can call this whatever you like. We called it do something, and it represents this function. That's what it does, okay? That sometimes confuses people. They're looking at it going, wait, there's an anonymous function, and then you're saying do something. Where'd you get that from? We made it up. We can make whatever name we want for this function, okay? So this is an important thing. Okay, let's move on. And we can do the same thing with imports and so on, just the same way. I'm going to move on. Classes. Classes were a new thing in ECMAScript 2015. Before ECMAScript 2015, we didn't have classes. We had functions. All we had was functions. And we had functions within functions within functions. Sometimes we called this function hell, all right? Where we had all these functions. We still have that today, by the way, all right? Functions within functions within functions. But classes were very similar to, they looked similar to, they almost feel like, in many ways, similar to C# or Java or other kind of classes. We use the class keyword, and we have instance members and static members and constructors and all that stuff, and we never had those things before 2015. Before 2015, didn't exist, okay? And so that's kind of something that we had, and this is an example of some classes that we had. I'm just going to zoom in here so you can see it. Here's a vehicle class. Here's a vehicle class. This is what it might look like in JavaScript now. The class vehicle has a constructor. It takes in something called wheels, and then we can say this dot wheels is equal to wheels. The problem with this thing is there are no types. We don't know what type wheels is. It could be a string, it could be a number, it could be whatever. And this is where TypeScript comes in. TypeScript will allow us to add types to this thing to get better tooling to help us to kind of find errors in our code. But this is a valid class vehicle. Class car then extends vehicle, which means now we inherit from vehicle. Question for you guys. Inheritance, is it a good thing or a bad thing? Good thing or a bad thing? We kind of talked about this a little bit. Inheritance, OOP, object-oriented programming. Good thing or bad thing? Programming side's a good thing, but is it a good thing for memory? The problem that we have with inheritance is that the child classes are much fatter than the parent classes, memory-wise, okay? Because the parent class is very small. It might have a few properties, but then the child class is going to inherit from the parent class, and I get everything that the parent had before, right? And if I keep doing that over and over again inside of an inheritance chain, like for example here, vehicle inherits from extends vehicle, car extends vehicle, right? But what if I wanted a special type of car, right? Let's say, for example, I wanted a car that was a blue car or some other kind of car, electric car. There's two types of cars, a car that's electric and a car that's, conventional fuel, like a gasoline car, right? So now we have another layer of inheritance. And those cars are going to be much fatter than the parent car and the vehicle before that one. And the problem with that is that we have these, lots of inheritance. But here's how it looks actually. If you look at it, it's not terrible to look at, in JavaScript. You can see that you can understand what's happening here. Extends is the keyword that we use to inherit from. The constructor that we use is the function, that's what a constructor is, that triggers when we instantiate an object, first time, right? And here in car, not only do we have a constructor that takes color, but we also have to satisfy the constructor from the superclass vehicle. Because vehicle is the superclass or the parent class of the car. That's how it is, okay? And you can see the way we use it is we use the new keyword here in JavaScript to instantiate an object of car. And we pass in a color property, blue, okay? Are we clear with this thing? Anyone have any questions around anything I've talked about so far? Object-oriented programming 101, okay?
No,
I know I'm going slow, and if I am, it's okay. Please bear with me. If you don't understand something, please talk to me about it right now. Okay, so hopefully you guys are good. And let me just go back there to the proper slide, which was modules, classes. There we go. Arrow functions. This is something new in 2015 as well, right? So it's been around in C# and Java since Java 8, as an example, way back. Now we're much further. We're Java 15, I think, or something, or 17. However, arrows are very helpful because what they do is they share the same lexical this as their scope. Now, when you see this line, lexical this, I mean, people don't understand what that means. Remember, we have a scope, right? And the scope that we have is typically, let's see if I can highlight that little thing. Stamp. Maybe it's this. I don't know. It is this. So lexical this thing here, this is funny. Whenever I see lexical, it's like, what the heck is that? What does lexical mean? It means the context. That's what it means. So remember that if I have curly braces, from the top of the curly brace to the bottom of the curly brace, I create a container, and that container is a context. So I can do a self, or this, if you will, in that context, right? What happens is, though, if I want to get the context from the main class or whatever, I lose that context in a function. So I can use the arrow function, and it allows me to pass the context from my container function into the function that's inside the other function. That's what it allows you to do. And in this case, we use them for closures more than anything else. Positive and negative. Positive, it allows us to get the context. Negative, sometimes it confuses which this are you talking about. Here's what arrow functions might look like. Okay, so the old way, we use something called squares, where we have numbers.map, where we have a function, an anonymous function that takes in a number, and then it returns number times number. That's squares, right? One way is using an expression body. This is one form, right? And we can say squares is equals to numbers.map, and then we just say n, and then fat arrow function, n times n. You don't need to have a return statement because it's one little thing, and then it'll return this in one line. Another form uses a for each loop, where you can loop through for each evens in the number. For every even number, we want to push that number to the result, right? And this is the old way for this one. Okay, so this is kind of what arrow functions are helpful for as well. They're a lambda expression. You've seen lambda expressions in other languages. It's kind of the same thing. Okay, we're going to move on. Closures. Again, that's functions within functions. All right, functions within functions. And closures are interesting. We're going to see these a lot because what they do for us is they create a context. And closures are used to hide variables and a bunch of other stuff. We're going to look at some closures today as well. Okay, I'm just going to move on. TypeScript. So now we've got the main things I want to talk about with JavaScript. You know about variables. You know how to declare a variable in JavaScript. In the new JavaScript, we never, ever use var. Ever. If you see var in JavaScript, bad. I never want you to see, I don't want you ever to use var in your life from now on, okay? Not in JavaScript. Maybe in Kotlin, we use var, no problem. Val and var, no problem in Kotlin. In JavaScript, no. No, 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 no. Ever, ever, ever. We use let. We use let and const. Those are the two things we use in JavaScript. And we'll talk about that here in TypeScript. So TypeScript, there was a requirement for TypeScript, okay? TypeScript didn't come out of nowhere. Back in 2015 again, or even earlier than 2015, Google was coming up with their framework. Their framework was called Angular, right? And Angular was actually a collaboration between Microsoft and Google. Microsoft and Google came together and they wanted to make a web framework because for years, people were complaining that there just wasn't a great framework that you could learn from. And so they created AngularJS, okay? AngularJS. AngularJS 1, the first version of Angular, was a horrible, horrible framework. It was very difficult to use. And Microsoft said to Google, and Google said to Microsoft, we need another language. JavaScript just does not cut it. There's no, programmers hate it. We want something that is a little bit more robust. And so Microsoft created TypeScript. It's a whole new language from Microsoft that is being used throughout the web. It's one of the most popular behavioral languages that we use in, I would say, on the web side. And if you don't know TypeScript, you're really doing yourself a disservice because if you ever go to an interview and if you ever get a job in the web industry, most of the time now it's all TypeScript. It's not JavaScript by itself anymore. Naked JavaScript is not used as much, okay? TypeScript is the way to go. So it's a programming language, like I said, developed and maintained by Microsoft. It uses it's a strict superset of JavaScript, that's what it is, right? It's syntactical, which means it's a different syntax. But in the back end, we still generate pure JavaScript because the browser, still today, does not understand TypeScript. It only understands JavaScript, which means we need to transpile from TypeScript into JavaScript. That's what we need to do, all right, in order for you to make it work. Okay, so again, both client-side and server-side execution can be used, TypeScript. It's not just for the front end, it can be used for the back end, and we're going to be doing that today. We're going to convert our little code we did last week into TypeScript this week. That's what we're going to do, okay? So back in the day, again, you can see that version 0.9 was in 2013. They started working on it, and as they moved into 2015, where ECMAScript 2015 was happening, it became better and better. Even today, current version is TypeScript 5.4, if I'm not wrong. March 2023, they came out with 5.0, and they keep on adding to it, okay, which is pretty good. So back in 2020, it was like one of the top 10 languages, right? You can see TypeScript was climbing up. And if you actually look at the Octoverse today, octoverse.github.com, you'll see that TypeScript is like number 2, right? It's coming really high in terms of where it is, right? And you can see the rise of TypeScript. You can see that it started off like not very popular at all. And then over time, this is from GitHub, you can see that it rose to like number 4 by 2022, okay? We need something called a tsconfig.json file. It's a JSON file that basically tells the compiler, TypeScript compiler, how we're going to do things, right? And we're going to create that today, right? So we're going to create a file, and that file is going to help us tell TypeScript, the TypeScript compiler, how to transpile, convert from TypeScript to JavaScript. Because again, at the end, we're going to produce pure JavaScript on the other side. Here's an example of what it might look like, right? We have something called compiler options. We have to specify the module type. Here it's common.js, the target, how we're going to convert to. Are we going to accept things like implicit any? Okay, let me talk about this for a second. Do we have data types in JavaScript? What do you think? How about the guys here in the room? Do we have data types in JavaScript? Yes? No? Or the guys online? I know you guys online are listening too. Do we have data types in JavaScript? Yes or no?
Yes, sir, we have.
We do have?
Yes.
We do. What are they? What are the data types in JavaScript?
The usual ones: string, boolean, number, float, and.
We don't have float. We don't have float. We don't have float.
I mean, yeah, the usual ones, which every language have.
Yeah. So we have number, right? We have string. We have boolean, right? We have array. That's a type, believe it or not. And we have others. There's other ones too, right? We do have some types. There's also another type, any. Sometimes we don't know what the JavaScript variable is. And if you don't know the type, for you, it means any. We never use any unless we have to for TypeScript. Because what we're telling TypeScript to do when we use the any type is, I don't need you, TypeScript. That's what it's basically saying to TypeScript. Okay? We don't want that. We want to use TypeScript, so we don't use any. And so here we have an option that's no implicit any, which means we're not going to allow variables to be declared without types. Okay, that's what we're going to say here. Remove comments is true, which means when we transpile from TypeScript to JavaScript, let's take the comments out and make it slimmer. That's what it means. And we need source maps because what source maps do, it allows us to troubleshoot in the browser when it comes to TypeScript as well. Okay, so that's kind of like our basic compiler options, and we're going to add more to this. More. This is just basic. Again, we're going to use TypeScript in Visual Studio Code, and when we use TypeScript, there's two ways we can use it. One way we can use TypeScript is we can use the command line, and we can just type in TSC, and then once we type TSC in, TypeScript compiles or transpiles from every TS file. All TypeScript files are .ts, right? All JavaScript files are .js. It's going to transfer from TS to JS. That's what it's going to do for you. Okay, that's what TSC does. The other way to do it is you can also press Control-Shift-B on a Windows machine or Command-Shift-B on a Mac for your to run the build task. And what it does, you can run the build task or the watch task. That's right in Visual Studio Code, right? The watch task, what it does is it watches for any files to change, just like NodeMon. Remember NodeMon last week? It watches for file changes. Same thing here with TSC, TypeScript. It watches for files to change, and when it changes, it transpiles everything again. So why is this important? Because remember, we're moving from TypeScript to JavaScript. And if you don't transpile, you're going to be like, I changed that. How come it's not working? Because you didn't transpile. That's why. It's the old file that we're looking at right now, not the new one that we're working on. So you need to have an automatic process to transfer from TypeScript to JavaScript, and that's what this does. Okay? And we'll talk about this when we actually do the demo. Okay, we're going to do a demo like this. So again, please be aware, like I said, browsers only recognize .js files. They do not, even at this recording, they do not recognize TS files. So if you did something like this, app.ts, it's going to be like, I don't know what you're thinking. What is this file, right? But if you do something like app.js, that's okay. And you want to give it the app.js file that's been transpiled from app.ts, right? Okay, questions around TypeScript before we move on. So TypeScript is like JavaScript. What we talked about, it has variables, and we talked really last week about it a little bit more. I want to talk about Node.js as if you've never done Node.js before, okay? Again, because Node.js is important for you. Some people have never done it before, true. They're just coming into this course for the first time. They're doing it out of order, whatever. I need to talk about it, so here it is. So again, back in 2009 now, right? Ryan Dahl, which is actually still an active developer in our community, right? He went on stage and he talked about at JSConf in the EU 2009. He talked about a project that was called Node.js. And back in 2008, when Google incorporated their V8 engine, that's what they were. They incorporated a V8 engine, and that's what they called it, inside their browser, in their Chrome browser. The browser became quicker. They wrote it in C++, and they made it so fast that compared to what it was before, that it was able to work and create almost a web application compared to what we had in the earlier part of the 2000s, right? And so Ryan Dahl, which was a developer, said, listen, this is great. We can use JavaScript not just on the front end, we can use it on the back end, right? And there was a problem. Let's talk about the problem that we had, right? When we're developing web applications, we have how many languages? We have HTML, CSS, JavaScript. We have PHP on the back end. We had some other language for your database. Like if you're doing MySQL, SQL query language. And we had Apache. You have to know how to do Apache for the server as well. Lots of languages for just to put a page up, right? It's impossible. It's very difficult. And people hated it. Web developers were like, how many more things do I have to learn? And things changed all the time. By the way, they still change all the time, right? So this guy says, listen, maybe we can use JavaScript everywhere. JavaScript on the front end, JavaScript on the back end, JavaScript in the database, right? And he first proposed Node.js back in 2009. And let's keep going. So Node.js is really great because it is easily scalable. And one of the things that they talked about was this idea of web server logic. A lot of resources are wasted on blocking code. Blocking code. Blocking code means I'm waiting for something to happen before I do something else, right? One thing that happens with JavaScript is it's asynchronous, right? Asynchronous. Sometimes it's really great for us because asynchronous code means it doesn't wait, right? It's just going to fire the function, and when something happens, it's going to return a promise of some kind, right? And what it's going to do is once I return that promise, then I'm going to react to it. It's an event that's going to happen after something happens on the server. Where PHP, for example, would always wait. It was just blocking code all the time. And the problem with that is it caused a lot of memory problems, right? So here's an example of Node.js, okay? Again, let's think about this as requests per second, right? Apache is the old server that we would use. And you can see here that the Apache server, in terms of performance, the more requests per second we get, right? And over time, what's going to happen is it's going to have slower and slower response time. Less and less requests per second, the increased amount of connections. The more connections we have, the less requests per second it can handle. That's how Apache works, right? So PHP, right now, the reason why PHP is going down in terms of popularity is because of this problem, right, even now. Nginx, which is basically the Node.js server, you can see that even though we have tens of thousands of requests and we have more and more connections, overall, it doesn't really decrease that much because we use an event-driven model, right? It's asynchronous, and so we can deal with many more events all at the same time, okay? And from a memory perspective, that's another problem. The more connections we had, the more memory requirements for Apache, right? Where for Nginx, it's the same. It doesn't increase at all. We can have many, many more connections, and the memory requirements are very, very small, right? Why? Because, again, of this event-driven model, right? And that's why the rise of Node.js. Node.js has become more popular because of these things right here, okay? One thing that we talked about last week was Node.js has a bunch of core modules that are built in, right? So when you download and install Node, we used MVM last week to install Node, right? We have a bunch of stuff compiled into the binary. Node binary is written in C++, right, as an example, and it includes many modules. However, you can't use them until you declare them. You say, I want to require them or import them. Here's an example of a module that we can use with Node.js. And instead of watching this, what I'd like you to do now is let's kick off a project together, because I think it's more interactive than watching me do this thing with, with PowerPoint slides. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of zoom out of here. And what I want to do here is I want to kick off, I'm going to use the Windows system today as a difference. And what I want you to do is, this is just for practice. I want you to create a practice folder. Okay, this is not for marks. This is just for practice. I'm going to go and put this on my desktop. And under, here on my desktop, I'm just going to make a brand new folder. I'm using Windows. You can put this wherever you want. On Mac, it'll work the same way. Make a new folder here. We're going to call this, workspace. Here's my workspace folder. This is for practice. And I'm going to show you stuff. Okay? I'm not going to, there's no marks. This is not in class exercise 2. Not yet. Okay? So if you want to watch, you can watch. But I want to talk about this, and I want to kick off Visual Studio Code here for a second too. So here's VS Code. And with VS Code, what I want to do is I want to just drag and drop my workspace folder in here. Again, this is great for practice. And then what I want to do here is I want to start thinking about a simple project, okay? So remember, I want to use Node for you guys because you're making an API. You don't need a front end. You just need Node. So let's do this thing. Let's make a module called index.js. We'll start with JS for right now, okay? So make a new file, and we'll call this index.js, okay? Index.js, okay? So it's going to make a new file. There it is, index.js. And what I want to do is just go to my PowerPoint slide deck here, and I want to take a look at this. I want to kind of require my file system module. This is what I want to do. I want to kind of grab this code right here, okay? I'll copy it. I'm going to also put it on your chat here. So for people who are watching, you can just like copy it from the chat. There it is in the chat, all right? I'm just going to grab this code though, and I'm going to go into VS Code here, right here, and I'm going to paste it in. Okay, so there it is. A couple of things for this code I want to talk about. I want to save this code. I want to talk about this a little bit. So const. So again, remember we said only let and const. Okay? I'm not allowing you to. Sure, let's update. I'll update VS Code for a second when we're talking. For let and const, I don't want you to use var anymore, like I said. So if I see var in your TypeScript file, all right, you will lose marks. Okay, I'm just letting you know. Okay, no var. It's not allowed. Because var, unfortunately, does something called hoisting. Right? Does anyone know what hoisting is? Hoisting. Right? No? You don't know what hoisting is? So if I use the var keyword when I declare a variable, and if I declare it inside of a for loop, let's say, for example, I make, here's an example, right? I'm going to just go in here. Let's make a function here. Let's suppose I'm using JavaScript. Take a look over here, right? I make a for loop. So for, and I say something like, for I, or whatever, right? I'm just doing it right here, right? Upgrade it to GitLands. Yeah. This thing is updating like crazy right now. Let's try this again. So if I do a for loop, come on, Visual Studio Code, there we go. And I want to do this for loop right here, this one. So this for loop right here, notice that it uses let. If I change this to var, right, what's going to happen is you would think that, and if I did something like, instead of an array, let's not do an array length, let's do 0 to, where index is less than 10, all right, as an example, okay? So here's a for loop, and we're just going to do a print console.log, right? Here's my console log index. Okay, there we go. And let's just put this over here. There we go. Console log index, okay? And what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to suggest this is just a JavaScript file. What's going to happen is when I run this thing, you would expect that the index variable would live and die inside of these curly braces, yeah? That's how normal languages work. But if I do this, the index variable is actually redeclared way up here. It's outside the scope. So var is very dangerous in JavaScript. Var is not controllable. Var does not live inside the scope. It lives in the entire document. Please don't use var, ever. Okay? It's bad. And so we use something like const or let. Here's an example of const. So here we're saying the file system, hey file system, I want to require the FS module. The FS module is the file system module. That's what it is, okay? And we're going to say, hey FS, I want to read file, and it says from etc. hosts. Now this is in another file system. What if I want to read something that's local? Okay, I want to read this file, and I want to output the data. That's what I'm doing here, right? So let's make a file for this. I'm just going to call this file data.dat. Okay, data.dat. And we're going to say hello. There it is. There's data.dat. It's going to read hello. Okay. And my index.js now, when I run this thing, I want to go into data.dat. Right? So I'm going to say /data.dat. And I'm going to read it. And that's the data. And I'm going to output it to the console. That's what this thing is going to do. Okay. So this is an example of Node.js. And how do I run this thing? How do I run this thing? Can I run it just like this? Question. Can I run it just like this? Do I need a package.json file? Do I need to download anything? What do you think? What are your thoughts, guys? Well, let's try it, right? Let's try running it. So I'm going to do in my terminal, let's try this out. You know, we'll try it together. And when my terminal comes up, I'm going to say something like, okay, well, I want to do a npm, right, run index.js. Let's try that out. And it says error, right? And it says missing index.js, right? Missing script index.js. To see a list of scripts, run npm run. What? What does that mean, right? Well, what it's trying to do is it's trying to run this script, but the script doesn't exist, right, for it, even though I'm trying to do this. How about if I typed in nodemon? Will that do it for me, right? And if I run nodemon, right, it says, yeah, we're good, right? It actually ran node index.js, and look what it said here at the bottom, hello. So what it did is actually went through and it said, okay, I want to look at the data.dat file, which is just hello, right? And then what I'm going to do is, if there's an error, spit out the error if I can't find it, okay? If I can't find that file, spit out the file. That's what this is, okay? But however, if I don't find a file, show me the data. Show me the data, right? Okay, and that's what this did. So it showed the data right here, hello, right? Because that's what's in this file, hello. Okay? Pretty simple? I think so. But I want you to see this thing. Now look, I changed things, and then it still says hello. Let's look at something else. Let's make this fail. Let's say that it's not data.dat, but I spelled it wrong. Data.da, data.da, right? I made a mistake. And if I save this again, it's going to say, sorry, error. I can't find any file with this name, data.dat, right? It's data.dat, right? And if I save it again, I try this again, save it, and run nodemon, it runs hello again. So you see that I don't even need a package.json file, right? And I just to run node and the name of my index.js. That's it. Very, very simple. This, my friends, is the lowest level of Node.js, that it allows you to run any file, any module that's built into it. These are called binary. The Node.js binary has a bunch of modules that are in it. We just have to require them, okay? Questions online for those people who, are you guys with me online? Thumbs up if you're with me, right? And if you're not, please let me know. All right, thank you, Akshit. Thank you. All right, we got Yesh Kumar, thank you. Thank you, very good. How about you guys inside the class? You guys are good? Thank you, excellent. All right, thanks so much, guys. All right, so that's really what we had there. So that's what this is. This example, what it does is it allows me to create a very simple Node.js file that allows me to read a file from the operating system. That's what it does, okay? Read a file from the operating system. We also have a lot of third-party modules, and one of them that we're going to use today is Express. One of them we're going to use is Express. And Express, what it allows us to do is it's a layer on top of Node.js that gives us a lot of functionality, okay? A ton of functionality, in fact. And again, I invite you to take a look at the express.js. If we go to expressjs.com, this is the documentation for Express.js. And really what it is a web framework that adds a lot of functionality. Like I said, last week we kind of generated it with the Express generator, and this week we're going to take it and convert it and make it into our own, okay? So that's what this is. Pretty cool, all right? And getting started, it talks about how to use it, as an example, how to install it, and you can continue to create, there's a guide on routing, on writing middleware, using middleware, and a bunch of other stuff, okay? Let's get back to this. So third-party modules, and I'm just going to maximize here again to talk about this. So let's do third-party modules. So again, what we use normally is the require keyword. The require keyword. This is in JavaScript. In JavaScript, we use require. That's what we use, right? And when we require a module, now Express, in this case, represents a reference to this module, That's what it does. Here, app, one thing we don't do with Express is here we're instantiating, even though there's no new keyword, we're instantiating an object of type Express and making it into an app. That's what we're creating here, okay? But we can also require files the same way. We can say const hello is equal to require modules hello, and then hello represents that module. Okay, very, very simple. Just like we did with JavaScript. Okay, so here's the example of how this works. Okay, when we develop web, Node.js web application, we use a lot of third-party modules, and one of the things that we used, one of the original modules that was very popular back in the day was called Connect. And Connect was a bunch of wrappers that made it easier to work with Node.js. That was one of the best modules that we used back in the day, right? But Connect was still pretty basic, and Express built on top of Connect. That's what we did, okay? So here's an example of Connect, right? Or using just creating a very simple server. Let's try this piece of code here, okay? So I'm just gonna kind of escape out of here. And let's use this piece of code here. I'm just gonna replace my workspace just for trying this out. I'm gonna take this code here. I'm gonna type it into the chat here for you guys to try it too. Here it is. So you can grab that code. Hopefully you guys got that. There you go. And I'm going to do the same thing for on this side. So instead of having this, I'm just going to stop my NodeMon, and I'm just going to replace this code here with the code I got from the PowerPoint slide deck. I don't need data.dat anymore. Data.dat. What a weird name, right? Let's just delete this one. Data.dat, right? But I want to copy this stuff, so we'll copy it. And I want to paste it in here. There we go. All right, so let's talk about this a little bit. Here's a module, and I'm just going to kind of change the curly braces so you can see them on top of each other, so you understand stuff a little bit more, right? And I'm also going to make this so it's on one line, so you can see this here on one line. Right, I'm just modifying the code here online so you can see it. There we go. And here is a little server that we can make with index.js. Now this is different. Here we're requiring HTTP, right? HTTP is the HTTP module that's built into Node.js. We don't have to get a third-party module here or anything else like that. We're doing something different here though. There's two things we talked about last week about making an API. We talked about having a request object and a response object. Remember how this works. The request object gets sent to the server, right? And then the server takes that request object, does something with it, or reads it, and then responds with a response object. That's what it does. So here, we made a request of the server, and it responds with hello world. Okay? Let's make it so that it's really hello world. The proper hello world is hello, comma, world, exclamation mark, like this. Okay, that's the real way of doing it. And not only that, but we're also listening on port 3000. That's what we're doing here. So we're saying, hey, HTTP, if you hover over, it says, to use the HTTP server in client 1 must require HTTP. The HTTP interfaces in Node.js are designed to support many features, and it talks about some other stuff in here. This is all part of the documentation that's built into Visual Studio Code. I didn't do anything here, okay? And create server returns a new instance of a server, so it creates a server, instantiates a server for us, right? And then what it does is we can listen, that's the method for the server, we can listen on a specific port. And we're listening on port 3000. Okay, let's run NodeMon again with this one.
Oh, sir, we can't see your screen.
Sorry?
We can't see your screen.
You can't see my screen?
Yeah.
How about other people? Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think you can't see my screen. I can see I think other people can see my screen, and I'm also recording it, guys, so you can always look on YouTube if you want to at the same time, right? So you should be able to see my screen. All right, so let's do this again. So I'm going to do things, and I'm going to run NodeMon again, right? And NodeMon, you can see it says, hey, are you want to trust this thing in private networks? And I'll say, yes, I do. I'm going to allow access, and it might ask me for admin access for this, it might not. And now I'm running on localhost 3000, okay? let's run our browser here. I'm just going to go here and put in localhost 3000, and now we get hello world. Okay, this is what you should get too, hello world. So back to this. So how do we do this? What does it do? So first we create a server, right? And the server itself waits for a request, right? And no matter what happens, no matter what request we give it, doesn't matter. It's going to respond with a 200. 200 means everything is okay. That's what it means. And we're going to tell it that the content type that we're going to create is plain text. It's not HTML, okay? And then we're going to respond with hello world as a message when we're finishing the response, okay? We're also going to do this while we're listening to port 3000. In the console log, we're going to log out server running at 3000 if there's no problems. That's what this little piece of code does. This is our first little node server from scratch. That's what this does. It doesn't do anything, right? You can change the port to something else. Change to 6000. Change to 8080. Doesn't matter, right? Again, I'm doing this on the Windows side this week, but it works the same way on the Mac. No problem. Okay, this is great. This is kind of like our little test, and it works okay. Back to this. So we talked about working on port 3000. But what about if we want to make it so we can read some static files? Okay, so that's the next part is, let's improve the little server we made. Here's an improvement. I'm going to grab this little code here, and I'm just going to kind of put it here. All right, so let's just make it so that you guys can see everything. Hopefully you guys can see my screen, right? Because that would be bad if you couldn't. So there's my screen. There's the new code. And what I want to do is, I'm just going to stop the NodeMon for a second, and I'm just going to replace this code with the code that I just got. Okay, and let's see if it has some problems. And why it has. I know what the problem is, because when I copied it over, by the way, this quotation mark is bad, and that's what it is. It gave me a weird quotation mark, and that's what a quote, a single quote. And it was bad, you have to replace it with something else. Okay, there we go. So here's another server, very similar to the last one. Let's talk about this for a second, right? And there's a difference, right? There's a difference between this one. This one, okay, it uses the file system to read a file, and it's looking at the dir name. So dir name is interesting. Dir name is a macro, okay, that looks at the current directory. The directory that I'm in. This would return C:\\, in my case, desktop workspace. That's where we are. That's the directory of where I am. Plus the requested URL, right? And then whatever that URL is, it's going to try and return it, right? As an example, as data. That's what it's going to try and do. So this is great if I want to return an index.html. Let's try this out. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to put in index.html. Let's try this out. And then what I want to do with my index.html, in Visual Studio Code, I can quickly scaffold an HTML document like this, HTML5, okay? And if I press tab, it gives me this, boom, right? Let me try that again. So HTML5, and if I press tab, we use emit, which is an abbreviation, and then boom, you get this, okay? And let's just do hello world this way. So I'm going to say here, inside of my document, I'll have an H1 tag, and inside my H1 tag, I'll say something like hello world. Yay, right? And this will be my, home page, right? That's what my title will be. Very, very simple page. It says hello world. It's an H1 tag, and I want to read this thing from my server. That's what I want to read, okay? And it's going to look at whatever the requested URL is here, okay? If there's no requested URL, if the requested URL is blank, what if I don't give a request URL, right? Well, I can check it out. So if there's an error, then it's going to return a 404, right? Otherwise, it's going to return 200, which is okay, and respond with the data. That's what it's going to do, right? And it's going to listen on 8080. Let's make it listen on 3000 again. I'm just making it listen to 3000. There we go. And what I want to do is, what if, request.url does not exist? Then I want to make a default that it looks at index.html, right? But we'll do that in a second. Let's try this out. So let's see what happens. So again, I'm going to go nodemon, and let's see if it runs. Okay, so it's running. And if I go back to my web page, and let's just refresh 3000, we're going to get error code, right? Because we don't know what we want to look for. But what if I put in here, what if I go here and I put in /index.html? Then we get hello world. Yay. Server, right? We did that in 2 steps, right? So how do we do this? Let's take a look again, what we did. So let me go through it with you. So first we import the file system module, and then we use the HTTP module. The HTTP module creates the server itself. The file system module reads a file from my current directory and plus whatever I put into the URL. If I put in something else like about.html, let's go back to that. Let's suppose I put in, instead of index.html, put something else like, I don't know, about.html. It's going to go, bah, sorry, there is no about.html. And it tells you that right here. It says code no does not exist, right? It says it's trying to open the path, C, users, Tom, desktop, Georgian, workspace, about.html. It does not exist. We're getting a 404. That's what it's giving me right now, okay? It's ugly, but it's telling me that it doesn't exist, okay? So that's what this does. So dir name, we're going to see this a lot. __ dir name is a macro that shows us our directory name. That's what it does, okay? And here we're JSONifying or stringifying the JSON response of our error. The error itself is what we're outputting to the screen, right? Instead, what I could do is I could create an error file. I could create an error file instead. What if instead of giving me this crazy error, we just put out an error file? Let's make a new file. Let's make a new file. Okay, we're going to call it 404. Let's try this out. 404.html. Okay, 404.html. And the 404.html is going to be exactly like my index.html. Exactly the same. I just copy pasted it. This is going to be just 404, right? And we're going to say, oops. The file or the page you're looking for, we'll say the page you're looking for is not found. The page you are looking for is not found. Right? How about that? Okay, so there's my 404.html. How do I get to the 404.html? I'm going to go into my index.js, and instead of doing this, right, what I want to do is I want to find this part. I want to get the directory name plus my 404.html. That's what I want to end with. Instead of this data, see where data is the directory name plus requested URL. That's what this is. That's what I want to do a file system read there, right? So instead of directory request URL, I want to do that. How do I do this if request URL is not found? Well, what I can do is I can say something like this. I can say, if an error, then I can say that, let URL, right, is equal to, instead of making URL request URL, right, like this is suggesting, what I really want to do is I want to, kind of create my data path itself. So before I go to the file system read file, right, the request URL, we can kind of figure out if it exists or not. So we can say that if request URL, here we go, request.url is not found, right? So we can say if there's no request URL, right? Then we can say that two things. I don't like these curly braces where they go. We can say that, first of all, we can say something like let URL is equal to this, right? and we can say that URL is equal to, if it's not found, we can say that it's equal to 404.html. Okay, that's the URL we're going to use, right? And instead of using request URL here, we can just use URL. Okay, pretty simple. We're just replacing URL here with our own. If it doesn't exist, if request URL does not exist, then make URL equal to this, right? Otherwise, what if it does exist? Here's else. If it does exist, then URL is equal to request URL. Is there a better way of doing this? Is there a better way of doing this in JavaScript? This is JavaScript 101. How do we make this so we can do this in one line? Can you write it differently? Come on, guys. The answer is yes, right? We can say that in one line, instead of doing this whole thing, we can say something like this. We can say that check to see if request URL exists, right? If not request URL, right? Then what do we want to do? We want to return slash 404.html or request URL. This is called the ternary operator, right? This is the ternary operator, right? In JavaScript. Okay, there we go. And so here we're reading the file, and we're going to use URL instead of request URL. We're sanitizing a little bit before we get here. That's what we've done, and hopefully this is going to work. Let's see if this works now. So again, control backtick. You see it's evolved, and if I refresh, we should get that. Let me just make sure it's restarted. Let's restart that manually. There we go. And make sure it's all saved. And let's see what happens if I put in index.html. Let's see what happens. Did I mess up? This works, index.html. What about if I put in something else? What if I put in about.html, right? Oh, see, it didn't do it yet. It didn't quite do that yet. So why didn't it do it, right? Well, because we have this error, right? We have this error where we wrote a 404 if there's an error, right? Because dir name plus URL. Dir name plus URL. URL, as an example, if the URL does exist, it does exist, right? So why is this bad? Because it didn't stop anything from happening, right? We didn't stop anything because if I search for 404, let's search for 404 instead. If I search for something that exists, like let's say, for example, I put in 404.html. 404.html says, oops, because that exists, right? But also, if I don't put anything at all, then it also says nothing. It says, this directory system call read, and there's nothing there, right? So this wasn't exactly correct. Let's try it again. Let's try one more time, right? So it's not the request URL. If the request URL, right, we can say if it's equal to slash, right, then let's give us back index.html. That's what we're going to say, right? Otherwise, put in the request URL in here, all right? And if there's an error, then what we want to do is we want to file system read again inside this file system read, right? We want to do this file system read somehow, and we want to read the 404. That's what we want to do. Okay, let's try this. Let's see if we can format this a little differently. And by the way, if you guys are trying this at home, and if you're trying it online, experiment. This is how we can learn how to do stuff properly, okay? So let's see what this does. So if I go here again, and if I refresh, you can see now we get a hello world, even if we don't put anything, right? But if I still have this problem, if I go about.html, we're still going to get this weird thing here. So how do I redirect? Well, it's here. It's in this error. If I get an error, then I want to do something else, right? The data that's formed, okay, I'm just going to show you this data. It's a buffer. We can't just say that I want to show the data. That's not good, right? That doesn't do it. What I have to do instead is I have to do a write head of 404, right? And I want to response end with data. And I have to change my data object itself somehow, right? Which means that I don't want to respond with the error at all. I want to respond with another file system read. Let's try this. Let's try this out. Right? So file system read. Let's do this again, right? Where we can say fs.read file. Let's try this again. See if we can do this like this. Read file, where we want to have this happen, right? Okay, that's what I want. So I do a file sys.read file, and I'm going to respond with the data. The data is going to be 404, and I'm going to return. Does this make sense? Where I do a file system read inside of a file system read. Is this not going to work? Come on. I think this is going to work. And let's refresh. And yay, it worked now. And let's see why. So I can put anything I want in there now, right? I can put in some garbage, and it's going to still go to 404, right? And what about if I put in index.html? Would it still work? Index.html? Yes, it still works with index.html, and we're good to go. Okay. So this is an example of some using the file system read file a couple of times, right? Just one inside the other one. Questions around this thing that I've done, is this understandable to you? If it's not understandable to you guys, you need to kind of read up on a little bit of Node.js and find out how create server works and all that kind of stuff. Because this is the basis of what we're doing with Express. The basis. Without this knowledge of what I've done here, then you're just going to be following along with Express, and you won't really understand what's happening. Okay. I'm going to take a break in another minute or so, but I want to come back to this. Okay, so we've talked about the files and serving static files. We talked about how to do that. And here's a more complete example of what I've given you here. You can try this out at home for yourself, right? There's a more complete example inside the code in this thing here, which gives you more of a not just the HTTP, but it also requires the URL module and the require FS module, and it gives you kind of a bunch of stuff that you can use to try out. Okay? So pretty cool. I think this is a much better example than what we have so far. All right, and with that, what I'm going to do is let's take a short break before we get into Express.js and talk about what Express.js is. Now again, what I'm trying to do here, just for people who are watching at home and for people who are going to watch this video later on, I'm trying to get you guys up to speed with understanding how things are built together. Okay, that's what it's going to be, right? More than anything else. So please bear with me. I know this is slow for some of you, but bear with me because I want everyone to be on the same page when it comes to how we're building stuff up. So let's take a short break. We'll take 10 minutes. We're sitting at 12:30 right now. We'll come back at 12:40 and we'll continue with the second half of this demonstration.